Hi, I'm Tom Burgess and welcome to The Real Agenda, the podcast for political change, where we don't just talk about the issues, we look at the answers and what we can all do to make change happen. Now today we talk to Anthea Simmons from the South Devon Primary and how a group of voters got together to make a difference in their community. And I was particularly interested in what Anthea and the team are doing, as it fits very well with the work I do with the non-partisan group Compassion in Politics, where we try to raise the level of political integrity and bring more compassion into political decision-making so that the unnecessary hardship suffered by so many is urgently addressed. Our party political system is deemed not fit for purpose. It is estimated that now about 70% of voters are considered floating, with no loyalty to any party. That's up from about 40% 25 years ago. And 25% of voters registered don't bother to vote at all. The current parties seem to no longer reflect the wishes of the electorate, and it's assumed that the Labour Party will win the next general election, but they seem to have no clear vision or offer a bold reform agenda, preferring not to make changes on urgent issues like tax and climate change. The Liberal Democrats so far have failed to break through, as they appear to have no clear vision either, or a very clear "this is what we stand for" pitch. So changing the voting system to proportional representation is essential, but the main parties want the status quo. But wait, is there another way? Well, in Australia we saw 10 independent candidates for the 151-seat House of Representatives and one for the candidate for the Senate. These were called the Teal Independents, and they were elected in 2022, of which 7 were elected for the first time. These are largely female candidates challenging the Liberal Party incumbent MPs. In a forthcoming episode on Real Agenda Radio, we'll be talking to Sydney Morning Herald journalist Margot Saville, the author of the book The Teal Revolution, about what we can learn from what has been happening in Australia. Now in South Devon, they had a Conservative MP for over 100 years, elected by a minority of registered voters. According to the polls, the vast majority of the country are dissatisfied with the current government. So how could change happen? I started by asking Anthea, what is the South Devon Primary?
South Devon Primary is basically a plaster for our broken democratic system. It's a plaster for first past the post. The South Devon constituency, which used to be called Totnes, is basically one has been Tory for 100 years plus and looks set to be for a Conservative to be elected again on a minority of the vote, with a lot of ambiguity about who the tactical vote was, because the Liberal Democrats came second last time. It was Labour second the time before that. A lot of the polling showed them neck and neck. And so depending on where you were in the constituency, people weren't clear about who they should vote for to remove the Tory from office.
So how did this all start then, and what did you actually do?
Simon Aldridge had the idea, first of all. He thought, why don't we just organise everybody, get everybody together, and we'll decide who the tactical vote is, and then we'll get behind them. So we'll run a primary. In fact, Totnes ran a primary to select Sarah Wollaston. The Conservatives ran a primary, an open primary. So there was a precedent for that. And he'd also been reading up about the Teals and about how a sort of community group, grassroots group, got together and shook up politics in Australia, united by sort of common values rather than party tribalism. So he approached me because I edit a progressive online paper, West Country Voices, and he ran the idea past me, and I thought, yeah, why not? Let's mobilise some people, get out there and see if we can't organise our own tactical candidate, as it were. Next level tactical voting. And Ben Long also came on board, again from a sort of climate action background. And the three of us just hacked it all together and got out on the streets and started recruiting people and spent many hours talking to the Electoral Commission about how it was going to run. And yeah, it caught people's imagination.
So what were the key issues that you felt that weren't being addressed by the current member and that you wanted to change?
Well, we're very, very concerned about action on the climate and government that seems to be in the pocket of the fossil fuel companies. So we wanted to see action there. We wanted to have a candidate in place who would support the climate and ecology bill. We were also very, very concerned about all sorts of measures to suppress democratic engagement, voter ID, curtailing protests. It certainly seemed to me that there were encroachments on our human rights, which people are a bit blasé about, but we're constantly having our rights eroded now under this government. And that, coupled with first past the post, which means that somebody could be elected on 30% of the votes cast, and with only 20% of the electorate itself, because so many people are disaffected, disenfranchised, don't bother to vote. It's always Tories, so why vote? It's going to be a Conservative MP forever. I don't bother to get out and vote because what's the point?
And is it getting worse, do you think, in your area? That feeling of apathy?
Not now that we've had the primary, and that's kick-started a lot of people into and it's spreading. I think people are thinking, yeah, hang on a minute. This is not right. We should be talking about politics in town halls. We should be engaged with it. We shouldn't let politics be done to us all the time. We should be taking an active role in this. So I think it's sort of channeled the anger people feel against this government and kindled a spirit of sort of optimism and a sort of more constructive attitude. And certainly the great thing about the primaries themselves, the primary itself, was that the meeting showed two candidates who were from different parties, but were very happy to sit together, agree on certain things, disagree constructively on other things, and people were viewing this and thinking, this is very grown-up politics. This isn't mudslinging across the floor of the House. It's not, bad-mouthing people and slagging them off. It's a much more hopeful sort of politics, much more inclusive.
But the Labour candidate wasn't involved.
Labour candidate hasn't been selected yet, so there is no Labour candidate at the moment.
So they couldn't. So they didn't
potentially put a bit of a spanner in the works. But
well, tell us about. So you organised a series of meetings around the constituency, where I understand they're packed out.
A brilliant turnout.
And what was the atmosphere there? You said they were feeling more positive, but were the particular grievances that were highlighted? Or actions that they want to take?
It won't surprise you to know that a lot of people are very concerned about the NHS, what can be done about that, because it's obviously been systematically defunded so that it can be prepped for privatisation, drive people into the arms of private providers. They were concerned about housing. Caroline Bowden cited an example that in Brixham a couple of weeks ago, there were 1,000 properties available to rent on Airbnb, and 9 properties available to rent for real people in real homes. So housing is a big, big issue. And what's happened is that the planning agenda has been very much driven by the property developers. So they dump their little boxes on the outsides of towns without any thought to the infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the medical provision, etc. And people aren't happy about that. So that, people could be accused of NIMBYism, but what people are really worried about is planning, a lack of planning, community involvement in planning decisions. And also the myth of affordable housing. Well, most of it is utterly unaffordable in an area where there are unfortunately a lot of low-wage jobs and, 0 hours contracts, etc. So housing was a big thing. Obviously, the action on the environment, sewage pollution, because, our rivers and seas are being polluted daily by by the water companies just dumping South West Water, dumping sewage. Kingsbridge particularly has had a big problem recently with sewage dumping, so that was a hot topic. We had a number of questions about whether either party, particularly the Lib Dems, I suppose, would ever go into coalition with the Tories. And there was Caroline Bowden, the Liberal Democrat candidate, gave an unequivocal answer that she would resign if there was ever any hint that they would go into coalition with the Conservatives. She said, I will not sit down with the Conservative government under any circumstance.
So you organised a vote at all these meetings you had. Was it 7 altogether? And so what was the result of the vote? Yeah,
so we operated a form of proportional representation. People were able to rank the candidates 1, 2, 3. Labour was still on the ballot paper, and Caroline Bowden won with 78.4% of the vote. Greens got about 20%. So now we unite, but we mobilise people to get behind her and help her in her campaign. So we're just about to put out an email with a link to a questionnaire from the Lib Dems, which asks people, what they're prepared to do. Put a window poster up, or go out and knock on doors, or help with leafleting, or have a board outside their house. So we'd like to think that perhaps at the moment the election's called, that suddenly boards are going to pop up absolutely everywhere from all of the South Devon primary supporters getting behind the People's Champion and making sure we land an historic victory.
So what's one thing that you had as a democracy meter? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So outreach was phase one, and that was a very important part of the process, getting out on the streets right across the constituency and talking to people, engaging with them. I mean, it was a bit of fun, really, but it was a way to get people to stop and talk. We'd say, could you just answer 6 quick questions? And they were not, they were quite loaded questions. Do you want to see the Conservatives win in this constituency at the next general election? Do you think the NHS is safe in Conservative hands? Do you think the Conservative Party will act effectively on the climate and nature crisis, etc.? So they were, it was pretty clear where we were coming from, and we said to people, this is we want change, and that's why we're here. And I think 2 things happened. First of all, people were very happy, surprisingly happy to be asked. They stopped and thought, I'd like to think about these questions and I'd like to answer them. So they put the stickers on, and they put them on with real vehemence. I mean, it's almost like therapy. They're like, no, I don't think they'll do this. No, I don't think. Yes, I do want to change. Yes, I am prepared to get behind one candidate to beat the Conservative. And a number of people said, oh, that was like therapy. I feel much better now. I've actually been buckling this up, and now I've been able to express it. And the other thing was that for people in areas that are perceived as being very, very conservative indeed, there was this real sense of, oh, crikey, I'm not the only one. I thought I was the only person that's thought like this. And so I've kept quiet, gone below the radar because I didn't want to, annoy anybody or upset anybody or get into any kind of conflict. And now I'm seeing that I'm just one of many people who feel this way. So people found that really reassuring. And it gave them hope. It's like, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, good. There are more of us. Fantastic. Yeah, let's do this. Yeah, so I think that whole thing of finding a whole load of kindred spirits, again, sort of coalesced at the meetings where people were coming out and saying, it was so lovely to sit next to people who feel exactly the same way I do. And it gave me real hope, that together we can change something.
So you were focused on getting the Conservatives out in your constituency, but could the idea that you're doing be applied maybe to, old-fashioned Labour constituencies elsewhere in the country that have just had the same candidate for years?
Well, it's not just about shaking up stale, safe seats. I would say it's a stepping stone on the way to PR. I mean, we don't want to have to do this again. We didn't really want to have to do it this time, and we don't want to have to game the system to beat the system. If we get proportional representation, and I think that's where the pressure has to be put on the Labour Party front bench to say you've got to get behind it. People want it. Most of your membership want it. Most of the unions want it. We can't go on with this ridiculous first past the post system, which only Belarus in Europe employ. Belarus, that absolute icon of democracy, not so. There were a number of ground rules. First of all, it was, you're not going to get PR with the Conservatives. It's not in their interests to go for proportional representation. I mean, the party will definitely split, and it should split. It's far too big a tent. It's got everybody from, the last remaining moderates to out-and-out fascists. And to a degree, Labour have got the same problem. They've also got too big a tent with, splits inside it. So both those big parties need to split, really, in my view. So our aim was the Conservatives are definitely against it. So we wanted to remove them. And also that this string of policies that we find deeply unattractive and dangerous for our democracy and for our standing in the world. So we are very focused on removing the Conservatives. Our ground rules were that we only would operate a primary in a constituency where there was ambiguity about who the progressive tactical vote was. So any constituency where there was a clear front runner from the Lib Dems, the Greens, or Labour, we wouldn't interfere there because you risk messing it up. But where there was doubt about who it was, and people on the street were saying, well, I want to vote actually, but I don't know who it is. And we're saying, well, that's what this primary aims to solve. It aims to make it clear that that's the one we're going to get behind.
Our democracy's been sort of really upset by this constant tribalism, hasn't it? I think 25 years ago, it was like 40% of people were floating voters and had no loyalty, and now it's 70%. So hopefully, I mean, do you think this is the end of tribalism and the two-party system?
Well, I'd like to think so. I mean, bringing in proportional representation would make a big, big difference. I think the other thing is that the parties often forget that party membership, those people with party membership, are in a tiny minority of the overall population. And I personally feel that the party system has been inimical to democracy in many ways because although when they're not in power, all parties say, oh, we put country before party, I get the distinct feeling that once you start getting close to them in any way or threatening the way they do things, they immediately become incredibly tribal about this, and very protective. And they base a lot of their decisions on what a very narrow little bubble think about anything and forget about the people who put them into power. Just the manuals. I suppose we're talking about putting the demos bit back into democracy. But to do that, you have to engage people and empower people and give people a forum in which they can express their views. So the principle of citizens' assemblies, of more grassroots involvement in local government and national government are all signs of a healthy democracy, as is education in schools, so that children are really engaged with it. I mean, I've been going into schools recently and I talk to these sixth formers who are about to get the vote and I say, why do you think do you think politicians take you into consideration when they're making policy? And they all go, no, absolutely not. So I said, why do you think that? Do you vote? Are you going to vote? And a lot of them, no, I'm not going to vote because there's no point. And I said, well, until you exercise your vote, you're not any customer of that. Why are they bothered? They're not going to bother with you because you don't vote. So you've got to get up off your backside and do something. You've got to register to vote and you've got to make sure you've got your voter ID and you've got to get out there and do something about that. That's the only way to make them listen, is to use your vote.
Absolutely.
And that's another element with the primary, was that the biggest cohort of people after those who voted Tory in 2019, voted Conservative, were those who were registered to vote but didn't bother. So, and we meet a lot of those on the street, and that is that whole, what's the point? It's a fait accompli. My vote's always weighted, so I don't bother, I don't now bother. And that was around 25% of the electorate. That's a big group of people. If you can mobilise even some of those, I reckon that's a major positive.
So that's what you've done effectively. You hope, you hope so. I mean, you've done it so far. With the South Devon primary, you've actually mobilised people to think about it and think that they can make change happen.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, some people might say, oh, it's only just over 1,000 people who turned up to actually vote on cold and rainy afternoons. Most people thought that was pretty astounding to get that many people out anyway. But I think it's more about how many people we reached on the streets and how many people are aware of it. And just the other day, I was talking to someone, they said, oh, yeah, I was sitting in the pub and there were people behind me talking about it. And they were saying that they wished they'd gone to the meeting, So that's great. People are talking about it. People are aware of it. It just raises the bar of engagement. And yeah, I mean, have we reached everybody? No, of course we haven't. Are we going to be able to get all of that 25% out motivated enough to do anything? Realistically, no, probably not. There are still a lot of people who will remain disengaged. But are we going to get more people out there thinking, I'm going to do it this time? I mean, that's the sort of conversation you have. Is people say, oh, I don't, what's the point? You don't bother. And I say, well, how about just this once bothering and just seeing if it makes a difference? Or they say, oh, all politicians are all the same. And they're all in it for themselves and, they're all corrupt. And I said, well, come along to a meeting and find out if that's true. And then people go, oh, no, actually, good people who care. I like it.
How can this idea of primaries be extended to other areas? How can you build on that to create a national movement?
Well, we've already got other groups who are exploring the primary concept and who have taken on board the idea of a community decision as to who to back when there's ambiguity about who the tactical choice is. So all the sort of the pollsters and the academics are sort of always saying, oh, you've got to refer to previous results and all the rest of it. And I think that's part of the trap that these constituencies fall into, that they get sort of flattened by the stats and by the history. And I think what these other groups are saying is just the act of sort of getting people together, running the equivalent of an assembly, is enough to sort of shake people out of that, either that complacency or defeatism about nothing can change, and reminding people that you can be the change, you can be part of the change. So in that respect, it's really catching on. And it's certainly something that can be run even without the participation of the parties. There's a way of doing it where you look at the manifestos and you agree as a community which one meets the community's needs and do it that way. So it's all about political engagement and reminding people that they have the vote, they have the power. It's up to them how they use it, whether they use it or just let it.
So you said
let it drop.
You said you took some inspiration from the Teal independence in Australia. What particularly inspired you there? I mean, they were slightly different because they were all independents. But what did you think similarities were, and what particularly inspired you from that?
I think really this idea of people talking to people about politics, of getting around the table, whether it's over a coffee or in a cafe or in a hall or on the street, and just, people to people contact. I mean, any salesman will tell you that people buy from people, and it's the same with politics. People want to see faces, and they want to have conversations, and they want to be listened to, and they want to ask questions. And that's, I think, what we got from the Teals was that if you want change, get the grassroots mobilized. That was really, really key.
And what about what happened in France with En Marche? The early development of that, because that came from the grassroots upwards, didn't it? And they had the idea where they gave people, a job to do, like go and do surveys, and they didn't have party it wasn't a party at the start.
Yeah, it was a movement.
Yeah. Was there anything there?
Yeah, I think it's an element of that, of giving people a job. I mean, for example, there's an individual who's quite shy, not really very keen on talking to people on the street, but he fixed up the trailer that was completely bust, that had we had a billboard trailer, which Simon had bought on eBay, unseen, needed a hell of a lot of work done. Anyway, this guy was brilliant. He just took it on and he sorted it out, and then he drove it around the place all the time. So he had a role and he made a big difference. And it was in a unique kind of a way. So there are some people in our group who have the facility to talk to anybody about anything. And there are some people who said, look, I just want to go and put a leaflet in a door, and I don't want to have to talk to anybody at all, but I feel I'm doing something. And there was a wonderful woman who made cakes for meetings. So yes, it's that thing of feeling I can contribute, and I don't have to be a gutsy, upfront, charismatic person who's going to go and speak to anybody and everybody. I can help. And I can feel that I'm part of this movement by fixing up a trailer or just putting a leaflet through a letterbox. So I think that is all very important.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it, how people actually, they do want to be involved. You referred to voters before that said, no, nothing ever happens, I'm not going to bother. But once you mobilise them, and once there's things that they can do, and they see things happening, which I think you've demonstrated, then you can move forward from there.
And it's great to have a bit of excitement, isn't it? A bit of sort of like, I'm part of a revolution. A lot of our people are inevitably older, retired, because they've got the time to do it. And they're And part of their enthusiasm has come from thinking that they're doing something for their grandchildren. They're showing that they're not in that kind of I'm all right, Jack mode of, well, I'm, not going to affect me, so I'm not that bothered. They've actually, got off their backsides and done something, and it's very energizing.
So what can we, the people, do? Anybody that might be listening, what can they do to make things change happen? Like what you have been up to?
Well, if they've got a constituency which meets our criteria, they could come and talk to us about possibly setting up their own primary. They could follow us on social media and get some inspiration about how things happen and how things get done, and maybe sign up for news from us. Because I think one of the things that we're looking at for the future is running maybe some webinars where we perhaps get Margot online from the Teals to talk to us and just talk about politics and talk about values and talk about democracy and our electoral system. And also I would say to people, get involved in the campaign for electoral reform, because that will change things a lot. That would be a very, very good way to engage and get involved.
Okay, so finally the election happens and Caroline Voden, your People's Champion, gets elected. What do you do next?
Well, apart from the big party, you mean?
Well, apart from that, yes.
Yeah, apart from the big party. We're going to monitor her performance and her voting record. She will hold a regular update with us, which will be available for, on Zoom. We'll probably do a Zoom and some in-person meetings where she'll come and report back to everybody and say, this is what I've been doing, and, take questions. And so she'll, there'll be a good level of interface. And as I say, we'll be logging and monitoring her commitments and saying, you said you were going to back this. Are you going to back it? Yep, absolutely. I'm going to get behind that. For example, when the Climate and Ecology Bill comes up, she's promised that she's, going to back that, and we'll be holding her to that. So, monitoring her performance and keeping in touch and keeping that sense of, we helped to put you there, so you work for us.
And also you'll be going out across the country helping other groups get started.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, helping other groups get started. But as I say, we hope this is the last election run under first past the post. So it's going to be quite different. So I think some people to pivot to campaigning for electoral reform is pretty key. We've got to have it. We can't do another election like this. We can't have this flip-flop between Labour and Conservative. It's not good for the country. No long-term planning, no long-term investment. Just, aggressive opposition and everything. It's not going to work. I mean, it may well be that the Conservatives aren't even Her Majesty's opposition. It might be the Liberal Democrats. You never know. Polls are anything to go by. It could well not be the Tories who are on the other side of the House.
Thank you very much, Anthea, for talking to us today. It's very interesting what you're doing there, and I really hope it kickstart a lot of similar activity elsewhere, and we see real change. So congratulations on what you're doing. So
brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot then, Anthea. All the best. Speak to you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks again, Anthea. It's great to see local communities come together and take action. We wish you luck, and we hope other communities will follow your lead. You can find out more at southdevonprimary.org, or for more information on how you could do the same in your area, go to politicalprimary.org. So what do you think? We'd love to hear your views, comments and recommendations. Email us at info@realagendaradio.org or go to our website, realagendaradio.org. And if you'd like a copy of my book, From Here to Prosperity, a new political agenda for sustainable economy and greater social justice, go to FromHereToProsperity.org or to any good booksellers. Yes, so look out for our upcoming episode where I'll be talking to Sydney Morning Herald journalist Margot Saville, the author of The Teal Revolution, about what we can learn from what's been happening in Australia and how community politics can bring change. And also we've got a new podcast series starting soon, we're very excited about this. It's called The After Party, with New Politics with Anya and Natasha. So join us for fascinating and informative conversations with two vibrant and accomplished women who've been right at the heart of politics. Now they're going to talk about their experiences and give you an inside track on the real goings-on in the corridors of power. But this is not another conversation between ex-politicians chewing the fat of their former greatness. This is very much a now show, and how the everyday struggles faced by so many could be resolved if we're only more compassionate, bold and forward-thinking. Because it's a time for a new style of politics which can be a force for good. So come and listen to how new politics can make a difference. The party may be over, but there's still the after-party. So The Real Agenda is presented by me, Tom Burgess, in partnership with Compassion in Politics. Find out more at compassioninpolitics.com. And this show is produced and distributed by Real Agenda Radio. For more information, go to realagendaradio.org. You can listen or subscribe to Real Agenda Radio on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Google and Spotify, and more, where you will find a range of podcasts of political change. So one thing is certain, people want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as a more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's not happening, but it can. And it's urgent, and it's up to us to make it happen. That's The Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.